Whenever I listen back to something that I do, it just makes me feel weird.
Hi, my lovely.
Hi.
Welcome to America's Got
There are
Talent.
moments on live television that stop the entire world. Not because of special effects or dramatic editing, but because something completely raw and real happens right in front of millions of eyes. In the summer of 2018, a 13-year-old girl from a tiny English village walked onto one of the biggest stages in American entertainment, wearing a black leather jacket and a fedora hat, visibly trembling with nerves. And then she opened her mouth. What happened next sent shockwaves around the globe and turned Courtney Hadwin into a name the world would never forget. But behind that thunderbolt moment lay a story far more complicated, painful, and heartbreaking than any television highlight reel could ever show. Courtney Hadwin was born on July 6, 2004, in Hartlepool, County Durham, in the north of England. She grew up in the small village of Heselden alongside her younger siblings, Melissa and Paul, raised by her parents, Paul and Anne-Marie Hadwin. From the very beginning, music was not just a hobby for Courtney. It was the language she understood better than any other. Her father, Paul, later recalled that his little girl was belting out songs around the house by the time she was just 3 years old. She was painfully shy in social settings, so quiet that her own grandfather noted she had sung in her sleep as a child. Yet the moment music entered the room, something transformed in her. She became fearless. She became herself. That contradiction, a deeply introverted child who turned into a firecracker the second she touched a microphone, would become both her greatest gift and, in many ways, the source of her greatest struggles. She trained at Shotton Hall Theatre School in Peterlee, took vocal lessons at multiple institutions including Kate Sear's School of Music and Julie Miles' Vocal Ovation, and absorbed the sounds of Tina Turner, Etta James, Aretha Franklin, James Brown, and above all, Janis Joplin. These were not the artists dominating her generation's streaming charts. These were legends from a different era entirely. But for Courtney, their music was the truest music, raw, unfiltered, and pouring directly from the soul. Long before America ever knew her name, she was already competing. In April 2015, at just 10 years old, she auditioned for the Teen Star competition in Newcastle, performing Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love, and reached the grand final. A video of her performing Say Something at a school lunchtime open mic session spread online in September 2015, earning her early attention. In April 2016, she won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award. In July 2017, she opened for Sister Sledge at a South Tyneside Festival concert, performing in front of more than 18,000 people. And in 2017, at 13, she competed on The Voice Kids UK, advancing all the way to the finals before being eliminated. By the time she stood before the judges of America's Got Talent, Courtney Hadwin was not a complete newcomer to the stage. She was a seasoned young performer with years of training and competition behind her. That would later become a point of controversy, one that would add a layer of unfair cruelty to a girl who was simply trying to share her voice with the world. In 2018, the 13-year-old boarded a plane for America with a suitcase and a determination that belied her age. She auditioned for the 13th season of America's Got Talent, and when she stepped onto the stage, the audience saw exactly what they always saw first, a small, shy teenager who could barely hold eye contact with the judges. Simon Cowell, Mel B., Heidi Klum, and Howie Mandel watched politely, expecting nothing extraordinary. Then the opening bars of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle began to play, and Courtney Hadwin became someone else entirely. She stomped, she wailed, she threw herself into every note with the ferocity of a veteran blues singer who had lived 3 lifetimes. Her voice cracked with the exact kind of grit and anguish that made Janis Joplin a legend. The audience erupted. Judges leapt to their feet. Howie Mandel, a huge Joplin fan, was so overwhelmed that he jumped up and slammed the golden buzzer, sending Courtney directly to the live shows without a single vote required. Standing before her with barely concealed emotion, he told her she reminded him of seeing Joplin for the very first time. The clip spread across the internet with extraordinary speed. Within months, it had accumulated over 50 million views on AGT's official YouTube channel alone. By the time she performed in the live shows, host Tyra Banks announced that her audition video had been watched more than 200 million times. Today, that number stands at over 310 million views. It remains one of the most watched talent show auditions in television history. Courtney advanced through the competition singing James Brown's Papa's Got a Brand New Bag in the quarterfinals, Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild in the semifinals, and Tina Turner's River Deep, Mountain High in the finals. Every single performance earned a standing ovation from all 4 judges. She was, by any measure, a phenomenon. But in the finale, something heartbreaking happened. Courtney did not receive enough votes to place in the top 5. She was eliminated from the competition. After performing Piece of My Heart with rock band The Struts on the results show, she went to Las Vegas to perform a run of shows with AGT winner Shin Lim, and then the world assumed the story of Courtney Hadwin would simply keep growing from there. It did not. In December 2018, Courtney signed a record deal with Psycho Music and Arista Records, 2 of the most powerful names in the global music industry. On paper, it looked like the beginning of everything. In reality, it was the beginning of one of the most painful chapters of her life. She was 14 years old, fresh off the most viral television moment of the year, and she had no idea what was about to happen to her inside the music business. As she later described in her own words, she was thrown into the deep end immediately. She spent months in America doing constant promotional work, television appearances, and press obligations that she did not particularly enjoy. I was in America for about 6 months and it was just constant TV stuff, she admitted years later. I didn't really like it. Then came the writing sessions. Week after week, her label placed her in rooms with pop songwriters, people who had no connection to the soul and blues sounds that formed the very foundation of who Courtney Hadwin was as an artist. They were trying to find her sound, but they were looking in completely the wrong place. Courtney knew it. She felt it in her bones every time she sat down in those sessions. She was being shaped into something she was not, packaged and softened and smoothed out for a pop market that had no idea what to do with a 14-year-old who sang like she had grown up in 1960s Mississippi. She pushed through it. She kept showing up. She kept trying. And then, just as she was beginning to find a few songs that actually felt right, the label collapsed. 2 weeks before her 16th birthday, Psycho Music shut down its operations. Courtney Hadwin, the girl the whole world had watched and cheered and adored, found herself completely without a deal, without support, and without any clear path forward. The promised debut album had never materialized. All of the momentum, all of the viral fame, all of the hope, had been swallowed by an industry that moved on without her. It really opened my eyes to the realities of the music industry and who to trust, she said later, with a matter-of-factness that only made the pain behind the words more apparent. I feel like I have to prove myself that little bit more every single day. What followed were years of silence that confused and worried her fans. The girl who had lit up the world's biggest stages in 2018 seemed to have simply vanished. There were no album releases, no major tours, no headline-grabbing moments. While the internet continued generating hundreds of millions of views on her old AGT clips, the actual living, breathing Courtney Hadwin was going through one of the most difficult periods of her young life. She was a teenager trying to heal from the shock of the industry's indifference while simultaneously navigating the pressure of being permanently frozen in the world's memory as that 13-year-old girl. Fans expected her to stay exactly as she had been, the shy, wide-eyed kid who transformed into a rock goddess on cue. Any sign of growth, any change in sound or style or personality, was met with suspicion or outright rejection by people who had decided they owned a version of her that had never truly existed. She has been open in interviews about the weight of those years. Growing up in public, under that kind of scrutiny, while also dealing with the collapse of her professional opportunities, was genuinely hard. She described how social media became a suffocating presence, with a massive audience that wanted her to remain static while she was a living person who was changing, learning, and becoming someone new. The bullying she experienced, both in her early school years and through social media during and after AGT, fed into her music in ways that were raw and unguarded. In her song Monsters, she wrote about feeling lost, scared, and overwhelmed. In You Only Love Me When I Lie, she confronted the frustration of being locked into an image she had already outgrown. After AGT, everything hit me at once, she said. A lot of people just wanted me to stay that 13-year-old girl. They didn't want me to change. The turning point came when Courtney connected with Kevin Bowe, a Grammy-winning producer and songwriter who had worked with legends including Etta James and Joe Cocker. Where the pop songwriters in those label sessions had never understood her, Bowe did from the very first conversation. He heard what she was, not what someone else wanted her to become. Their collaboration, largely conducted over video calls before she eventually traveled to Minneapolis to record properly, became the creative relationship that finally gave Courtney the album she had been waiting years to make. She threw herself into songwriting with a commitment she had never felt before. She had always been resistant to the process at first, but through working with Bowe she discovered that writing her own songs was not just a skill she could develop. It was the only way she could truly speak. Songwriting has become the only way I can properly express myself, she said. I'm not very good at talking about my feelings, so songwriting has become that outlet for me. In 2025, after a wait of nearly 7 years since her AGT audition, Courtney Hadwin finally released her debut album, titled Little Miss Jagged. It was everything her talent had always promised and more. The record moved across soul, blues, punk, and rock with absolute authority, held together by a vocal presence that had only deepened and matured over the years of waiting. She performed at Carnegie Hall for an event honoring legendary music executive Clive Davis. She headlined sold-out shows across the United Kingdom in September 2025 and returned for another UK tour in February 2026. She signed to Total Artist Management and took full ownership of her career as an independent artist. The tragedy of Courtney Hadwin is not simply one event or one bad contract. It is the story of what the entertainment industry so often does to the people it briefly decides to love. A girl of extraordinary, once-in-a-generation talent was pulled from her hometown at 13, placed under the brightest lights in the world, handed a viral moment that hundreds of millions of people watched, and then quietly abandoned at 15 when the business could not figure out how to commercialize what she was. She was left to rebuild herself largely on her own, while the old clips of her continued to accumulate views and the world wondered where she had gone. She could have disappeared entirely. Many do. The music industry is littered with the stories of young talents who burned brilliantly for a single televised moment and were never heard from again. The fact that Courtney Hadwin refused that fate, that she kept writing, kept singing, kept finding her way back to who she actually was, speaks to something in her that no label deal or viral statistic could ever fully capture. Her story is a reminder that behind every incredible performance is a real human being with a life that extends beyond the clip. The shy girl from Heselden, the one who sang in her sleep and could barely look strangers in the eye, had more resilience in her than most people twice her age. And the voice that stunned the world at 13 has only become more extraordinary with every year that has passed. Courtney Hadwin's heartbreaking tragedy is real. But so is her survival. And perhaps that is the most powerful story of all.